All right, hello and welcome to CSS review. We're really focusing on Flexbox and Grid. So let's review some of these concepts. Flex and Grid both use a very similar mental model that is fundamentally about. Actually, I'm gonna do this different color.
On your screen with us? Is there something you're showing us?
Yeah, that would be pretty good, huh? Come the fuck on. Friday for everybody.
Right.
It's fundamentally about parents and children. So ordinarily, when we use like our two basic display modes, we have inline and block. Inline and block don't affect anything else, just themselves. So if, actually I'm going to make those a different color too. So if I have a block element, it tries to take up the whole width. If I have inline elements, they only take up as much space as they would just automatically take up. Another block element, another block element, one inline element, another block element. Questions about that idea?
Do the inline blocks always go in just like that? So if I have three P elements and I say these three P elements are inline, they're all going to be back to back on that row.
Right next to each other. It does not matter what the element is. CSS doesn't care. Inline is inline, block is block. Now, if you do inline block, that's just inline, except it also has box model properties. So padding and border and margin and that kind of stuff. Ordinary inline elements don't. Because think about like, oh, what should the padding be of bold text? Like, doesn't make any sense. So, but if we have something that we want to act inline, but it should have padding and border and all that kind of stuff. That's why we use inline block. More questions about inline and block?
So just to clarify, kind of reiterate what you said, for inline elements, they don't have margin or padding because, like you said, it's like a P element. So what are you going to put margin and padding on a paragraph tag kind of a deal?
You very well might, because a paragraph tag is blocked by default. It's the text inside of it that you're more likely to use inline on. So like strong is by default an inline element, or emphasis, or an image tag. Like those don't have that stuff by default because they're assumed that like they're in line with something. If we want them to have those, they're inline block. One of the things that's kind of interesting about this is that they nest. So as our HTML like elements nest, you could also have something that tries to take up all of the space inside of that, and then other things that don't. Those take up just the space that they're given. Maybe this one. So they also nest this way, inline and block. And then that one could have inline elements inside of it. And so on. They still don't like affect each other, interact with each other. If you try to take up as much space as possible, you're constrained by your parent. So if your parent was an inline element, like that's the most space you can take up. Questions about that?
That's a good reminder, because that was some of the issues I was having on my website
Yep.
when I was doing it. Was I kept trying to shift things over, and what I was really doing was I was taking my inline elements and giving them a little bit of buffer, and that's what I was really doing. And instead, I should have been having, either throwing them in a block element if I really wanted to have it out in the middle, or something else.
Definitely. You're always going to be constrained by your parent. So if your parent isn't that big, you're not going to be able to get that big. If your parent doesn't stretch all the way to the right side of the screen, something inside of that parent isn't going to get to the right side of the screen.
What dictates the size of like your actual inline element then?
Sure.
Like, do we set the size?
The content of it.
Okay.
So if it's an image, how big is the image? If it's text, how much text is there? Other questions?
So if you had
yeah.
like a small novel written out in one of these inline elements, it could span the whole page like a
take
block
up the
would?
entire thing.
Okay.
Great question. Others? All right. So that's inline and block. What you can't do with inline and block, we don't control the left and right, not really. We don't control the up and down, not really. It's a document. So it's just like we were writing this out in like Word or something like that. Now, what you can do is, let's say you have a block element like, oh, I don't know, a paragraph. You can center stuff in there. So if there's text inside of this, text align center will center it inside of that block. That'll center all the inline elements here. Because the container takes up all of that space. By default, the first inline element or text or whatever is going to go there. I can text align center and put the text in the middle, or the right, or the left. I have that much control. That's not a ton, but it's a little bit.
So because we can take a block element and rather than using justify content, we use text align center. You said that can manipulate other elements. So if I have a wrapper and I use it as a block, I can have a div in there and use text align center, and it center that div to the center of the screen.
No, because it's a div.
And that's an inline element?
So if I put a div inside of here, that's another block element. And so that's just going to be this. And if there's content inside of that, it's going to, by default, be all the way over to the left. So centering the div inside, centering a block inside of a block doesn't make any sense.
Oh, that makes so much more sense, because you centered the div, but the content didn't move at all, because content's like, okay, fine.
Yeah. It is centered.
So in that case, you pitch your internal wrapper and just put it directly into the block element with you.
Ding, 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 ding. More questions about inline and block? All right, let's fuck around with it a little bit. So, code sandbox. All right, so over in this HTML, I'm going to make some boxes. Okay, and let's get rid of all this. And let's hit those styles. And I'm going to say that outer, everything with outer has a border of 1 pixel solid red. Middle is blue. And inner is green. And then while we're at it, I'm going to say anything with block is display block, and anything with inline is display inline. All right, so right now what I have is they're all divs, so they're all block. So each of them, from the inside green to the middle blue to the outside red, all of those are trying to take up the entire width. If I make these inline, come on.
My eyes must be getting bad because that red looks black to me.
Yeah, let me actually add a little bit of padding to these two. That might help. Padding, 16 pixels. There we go. And I'm going to thicken these up just a little bit too.
That's better.
All right.
Is your encoded text in there just to give it some girth and make sure it's not flat?
Correct.
Okay.
Because, yeah, it needs to have some dimension to it. All right, there we go. There's one outer container that's block. Here, I'll make it explicitly block. All right, So the outer block, all those middle ones are blocks. So they take up as much width as they can. Otherwise, their size is determined by their contents, but they afford as much space as possible left to right. All the inner ones are inline, and so they only take up as much space as they have content for. And right now, that's a non-breaking space and some padding. Questions about any of this?
Could you toggle back to the CSS page real quick? Thank you.
If I make this box here block, try to imagine in your head what's going to happen. Visualize what happens if that green one turns into a display block. Hopefully that matched.
It kind of matched. Why didn't it still go in between? Why didn't it take up the space in between the two boxes?
That was going to be my question. Why didn't it?
Didn't it
Because I
though?
thought they'd,
this way?
well, I thought they'd still stay on the same line. You know what I mean? Like I thought.
Ah, because that doesn't take up the entire line. Remember, as soon as a block element happens, it needs to take up the entire line. So if this thing started and I try to put one here, it can't take up the whole line. So it's not taking up the rest of the line. It needs to take up its own entire thing. That's what block means.
Okay.
And that's why it by default pushed the other two like
Correct.
above and below it.
Exactly. That needs to be its own line. And so it goes, all right, well, I can't have my own line and also share the line with these ones. Meanwhile, these guys are inline, so they're like, what do I care? Something else needs to take up an entire line? Let it, man. I'm only going to take up this much.
So what would you change to make that middle one still be in line but can expand out?
Ah, that's where we need something like Flex or Grid. There's not a way you can do that with just Inline and Block. Well, let's take a look at what happens if I do text in here. So this is block now. So inside of this, I'm going to make one for so if I put center on that, that's fine, because I'm centering it inside of this big box. Meanwhile, if I try to do that with this one above it, which is inline, and I center it, nothing changes. It is centered. That's a super common mistake that I see people make all the time with trying to like center stuff. You're always constrained by the size of your parent. If your parent isn't that big and you're inline inside of it, you already are centered. Questions about any of this so far? Cool. This is critical. Flex and Grid doesn't change any of this. In fact, it like just supercharges it. but we're still fundamentally working with, is it an entire line or is it just shaped to the content? So there's a question about, make these non-breaking spaces again. Okay, how would I get it so that this takes up the rest of the line, but is otherwise on the same thing as that first one? Well, it gets a little bit tricky. So, especially if we want it to not include this other one here. If I want this to be like a little tiny, like just inline kind of thing on the left, inline thing on the right, and have the middle take up the rest of it, that's pretty easy. So I'm going to call this middle block container right now. And so I'm going to make this a flex container. So as a reminder, flex affects its children. So like I targeted that parent blue container. That means it has control over its immediate children. It ignores whatever display mode that they have. It just takes control of them. So if I say I want the container to flex, okay, so that puts them all in a row again, but they're controlled by this parent container now. The other ones aren't. This is just block and inline. These ones, though, are controlled by this top blue one. I'm going to give that a different color, actually. This one's purple. Okay, so the purple container controls the green boxes inside here. I can do things like spread them out. In the space between. Come on. Hey, spreads them out inside of there because the purple box is in control. If I do space around. Also keeps a little bit of space on the left and right. Kind of averages those out into it. I could do flex start. That pushes them all the way to the left. I can do flex end. That pushes them all the way to the right. I can jam them all up in the center. You might notice that if I try to do the cross axis, oh, nothing changes. Why?
It has no width or no height.
Yeah, it already is centered. Now, if I set the height of that, now it's centered. And I can do the same thing with that, where I can do flex start, flex end, and the space between. So I can use those things to control where on this, in this purple container it goes.
So align items only works with the height aspect of the content that's inside of our big box here, and then justify content works with the width, essentially then?
Primary axis, cross axis. So by default, it's exactly like you described. So if I do flex start for that and flex end for this one, justify content is the primary axis, which is right to left. So I'm saying I want it to be at the end of that axis. The cross axis is up and down. So I'm saying I want it to be at the start of that axis. You can flip those. You can say, I want the flex direction to be column instead of row. And now they're flipped. So justify content is the primary axis, which is now up and down. And so it put all of those at the end of that axis. Align items is the cross axis, which is now left and right, which is now the beginning. If I make that row, axes get reversed. Make it column. It's that. Just rotating it on its side.
That makes so much more sense. I have used flex direction wrong a couple of times.
It's not arbitrary either. Something that is flex direction column is something that grows down. Something that's flex direction row is something that grows sideways. So if new elements were supposed to get added here, then here, then here, then here, that's row. If new items get added here, then here, then here, then here, then here, that's column. Other questions about controlling things with the flex layout?
When something is growing, does that mean that it's, let's say it's centered, does that mean that it's going to inherently stay centered? Or if we have something centered and it's growing, does it go like from that point and continue outwards?
So let's set it back to row and see. Okay, so it's got those things there. Let's say I add some content to them. Does its best to just try to keep them all in the center.
Okay, cool.
Now let's say I want to vertically center this in here. Who can tell me how I do that?
In this, can you go back to your CSS real quick, just so I have, and then is this where we would do the align content center in our container?
Align content is part of grid, but it's not part of flex. The answer is like way more like straightforward. It's not a property or anything. I could turn this into a flex container and do the same shit.
So would that be you go to enter on line 11 and then do display flex and then align content?
Sure.
Okay. Yes.
Let's see. Let's take a peek why that didn't work. Aha! It's because that's already taking up the whole thing. What I could do is put those in paragraph tags. So like if I put this in here, that do it? Let's take a look.
Is it because we're not targeting the P element within our inner? So
Oh,
we
no,
have inner as the parent.
It's because it's getting overridden. See? Because I wrote block first. Or I wrote block afterward, so it's overriding it. If I put these there we go. Oh, and they didn't need to be inside paragraphs after all. By making each of these inners its own flex container, it can flex its text content now. Questions about any of that?
Can you go back to your CSS one more time?
Yeah.
So because we had the .inline class display inline block, and we originally had these outer, middle, and inner above that, it was overriding what we were doing in those boxes.
Bingo.
Because it's reading down. Okay.
Because they have the same specificity. They're both just one class, and one of them came later, so it wins. Want to know a really stupid way that you can work around that anyway? This is so fucking dumb. This is the hackiest thing I will ever teach you how to do in CSS. All right, so I have that same problem there. The problem is that inner does display flex, but it also is, what I call it, inline and block both end up overriding that display property. So you can do that and it'll override it. Because now it has two classes, so it's more specific. It's the same one. Like, yeah, stupid. Stupid. Don't ever do that. The other thing you should never do is that. That'll also do it. That's it, like escape hatches in TypeScript. It's a drug. You get addicted to it and just ruin your style sheets.
Couldn't you also, so it's in this way and our cascading doesn't allow that inner to be read. Couldn't you just retag inner below your block element and then it would do it that way too?
Yeah, that would also work. And that sucks for kind of some of the same reasons. It's not solving the actual problem. Feels hacky. Hang on just a sec. I'm going to hit the bathroom.
Now we can actually copy this, you guys.
Yeah, I was doing my best to do it while he was doing it, and he was making changes so fast. I'm like, damn it.
Good luck. I got lost.
Screenshots.
What's that? Oh, mine's super janky over here. So did he give a tag to different classes by just having it say inner space and then block or something like that?
I think so, because I was watching him do that, and I'm like, oh, yeah, he's just adding additional tags right there.
That's so crazy. Right.
Yeah, I didn't realize you could do that either. That's kind of cool that you can give it multiple class names.
You can.
That was,
Without having to
I was
rewrite out
thinking
class.
that was just one long class name.
Give block some padding.
I guess so I guess in that scenario then to make it one last class name, would you have to do like the little dash in between each of those words as opposed to a space? Is that how that would work?
For one
Yeah.
class, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So if it was inner block, you say inner dash block?
Dash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Inner dash block? Well, I didn't do anything.
No,
Oh,
as
no,
a class name.
Oh.
Yeah, we were talking about how you've created different class names just by
Gotcha.
putting a space in between them. I
So,
don't think
yeah,
any of us have ever seen that.
So if you do that, that's looking for something with the class of inner that's inside of something else with the class of inner. If you do that all together, that's something that both has the class inner as well as the class inner. Like it even gives you an example when you hover over it. That's nonsense. Like it has the class once. It doesn't check that it's in there twice or anything like that. That doesn't make any sense. That's why that hack works.
And real quick, Kyle, can you go back to your HTML?
Yeah.
So are you able to give yourself, like in your class here, where you give yourself multiple class names by doing the spaces? So you can just give yourself as many class names as you want?
As many as you want. Dozens. And in fact, like a lot of my least favorite HTML code
Your
does
favorite
exactly
website.
that. So if we take a look at the source code for this, yeah, that one has 2 classes. That one has 2 classes. Just divs on divs on divs, man. Can't get enough of these divs. That one's got 2 classes. Oh, cool. It took it all away from me. Yeah, point is that you can have as many classes as you want. That one has 3.
So like in your example, though, on the code sandbox, that makes sense that because you're like, it kind of explains what it is, right? But you gave it 3 classes, but realistically, you should probably only give things 1 class, right? Otherwise, it just kind of becomes jumbled.
Not necessarily. So if I look at the LMS, I often do it that way, but I don't think that's required. I don't think twice about anything having more than 1 class. It's when you're using semantic names, you can usually target something. Let's see. No. Yeah, I just gave this one 1, and then like all of the CSS for that, I just hang off of that 1 class. So yeah, when you're using like semantic names, that sort of makes sense. But yeah, I don't lose any sleep over using multiple ones. Oh, I know a place where I use a couple. Here. So internal links. Yeah, this one has 3 different classes on it. One is like one to identify it. One that's like a variable almost that determines whether or not it goes beyond the container or not. And then this is any other ones that got passed in. So you can use them to kind of make something configurable too, like active or something like that. Actually, that's a great example. Something might be an inner link, and it might be an inner link that's active. And if it is, that means that it's got a circle around it or something like that. More questions about anything we've done so far?
Could you go back to the CSS?
Love to.
Just for me visually on dot container, could you comment out display flex?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, because otherwise it's just blocks. Anything else so far? All right. So Flex gets you pretty dang far. Oh, I remember. The other thing we're going to look at is, can we find a way to make it so that this one is fitted to the content, and this one is fitted to the content, and this one takes up all the space in the space between. Yes, we can do that with Flex. So what we'll do is we really just need to target this one in the middle and then tell it it's allowed to grow. And so how you would do that is, I'm going to give this one a class of grow, like that. I'm going to say anything that has a class of grow has a flex of 1. Ta-da! And if I make those like that. Now this one confuses people a lot because flex is the name of the property, not the name of the value. And this is like a shorthand for like 6 other things, but this is how most people tend to use it, is you target the item, not the container. Remember, I'm getting this guy right here. It's like border. Make this one like yellow. I'm targeting that item and telling it, hey, by the way, grow as much as you can.
That's what Flex 1 does.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, what you can also do is make that like relative to other things. So multiple things could have flex properties that have different numbers, and then that makes it a proportion. I want this to be twice as much as this thing is flex 2, this other thing is flex 1, so it should grow, and it should always be twice as big as the one that's 1.
Is that basically sort of like a hierarchy, like with headings, H1, H2, 1 is the biggest?
Think of it less as a hierarchy and more of a proportion. So if I made this one grow 2, and I made this one grow 1, then I could do grow 1, grow 2. So now, see how they're both the same size? That's what setting them to the same flex value did. Is like, whatever they are, they should be the same. And I can make this one a 2. And whatever it'll be twice as big as this was. Both of them, I'm saying grow as much as you can, but also observe these proportions. And that was part of like that's why it's called flex, is because you're saying this container can grow up to this amount. And you can also do it the other way. You can say, by the way, if it's possible, you shrink down to this amount. You have a lot of control over that. You can say that the size is flexible.
Okay, here's my dumb question of the day. So if we had those in opposite order, would grow 2 not be observing grow 1, and therefore, or would it still work either way?
Works. So if I made this grow 1 and this grow 2.
Okay.
And if I set them both to grow 2, it's exactly like setting them both to grow 1. Because the proportion between them hasn't changed at all. They both have 2, so that reduces down to 1 to 1. More questions about that? One other thing that you can do with the with flex items that is bonkers. It's like one of my favorite things you can do is you can set the order. So right now, this is the first thing and this is the second thing. I can also flip those around. The Fox Quick Brown. Just by setting this order property, it doesn't matter what order it is in the HTML. This is semantic meaning, and it doesn't even determine what order things display in. You can completely control the appearance of something with CSS. So if for whatever reason, like the semantic order of something doesn't match how it's actually displayed, we can also control that with Flex, which is bonkers. I think it's really cool.
And because it's cascading, even if you take out order 2 on line 37, wouldn't it still stay the same because you have order 1 in grow 2?
Nope. No, because it does it in relation to other things.
Oh, okay.
Along the same line, if you had order 2 there but didn't have an order 1,
yeah, I don't think that does anything. Let's see. Yeah, it doesn't change anything.
Okay.
Awesome. That's Flexbox. Any other questions about it? All right, let's go back to Inline and Block. So I'm going to get rid of that and these. And get rid of those. Okay, back to just inlines and blocks. So what we can do with grid is it's a little bit more powerful. Let's say I wanted to display these. I don't know, we're like the and Fox are on the left and Quick Brown is on the right. So something that looks like that. So if we wanted to do that, we got to figure out what the grid is. So that's the grid container. And it has like 2 columns and 2 rows. So I'm going to say the outer block, I'm going to make that grid. Display grid. Cool. So the red is, or I'm going to do this with the blue. That's block. That's grid. There we go. All right, so first thing I need to do is define that grid. That's step 1. Step 2 is I need to place things on that grid. So that's grid template columns. And then I need to say how many columns they are by saying what size they are. So I could do something like auto. That's going to be 2 columns, and each one is just whatever the size of the content is. I could do something like auto fraction. So one fractional unit would be, first column is whatever the size of the content is, and then the second column is whatever the rest of the available space is. And then I could say something like grid template rows is just 2 fractional units. Or a really common way to do something like that is repeat 1 FR twice. That's pretty common too. So that defines.
That was going to be my
grid.
question.
Yeah.
So that was going to be my question, is whether or not we would have to list out each individual row or column, or if there was a shorthand.
There's the shorthand.
Okay.
So that's defined this grid. Now I need to place things on that grid. So let's say I have like grid nth child 1. That doesn't like that. Oh, empty rule set. So there's 3 children here. What I need to do with these is say where on the grid they go. So this could be like grid column. So first one should start on the first column. And oops, and then I need to tell it how far to go. So it's in the first column, and it only takes up one cell. So that's span 1. And I can do the same thing with the row. It should be on the first row line and then span 1 cell. So that doesn't actually move it, but that's saying this is grid line 1, that's 2, that's 3. So which of those grid lines does it start on? And then how far does it go? So that's grid row 1, span 1, like that. This would be grid column 1, span 1, or span 2. So that's how we place things on the grid, because they can cross grid lines too. All right, so that one goes there. We could say that the second one, we can even put it in the exact same container. Check that out. Jams them together. Or we could say this one starts on the second row line, but is still on the first column. So column 1, span 1, row line 2, span 1. And then for this third one, we can say this one starts on the second column line and spans 1 cell. And we can say that it starts on the first grid row and spans 2 things. Oh no, but I want this content to be centered inside of this. All right, well, make it a flex container and do that. Ta-da. With those tools, Inline and Block, Flex, Grid, there is not a normal layout that you can't make. What I mean by normal layout is like something that's box-based. But even stuff that like is a little bit different than that, I mean, there's ways around all that shit. So I could say that this grid container also has border radius 50%. Which turns it into a circle. I could do a transform on it that is rotate Z 20 degrees. And now it rotates the whole thing. So like you can get pretty crazy with this. Border clip, that's what it's called, right? Border clip. Clip border, clip path. Let me pull up an example. Oh, there we go. Something kind of like that. Cool, and now we can use that to do all sorts of weird stuff. You could also say, I want to translate that on the y-axis 30 pixels down. So you can do some wild stuff with CSS. You might have seen the the paintings that are done with CSS.
And those aren't made with like AI or any gimmicky thing like that. Those are actual people using just CSS.
Actual people using just CSS. Look, you can see this one having z-index problems because the rough isn't accidentally went in front of her.
That's insane.
That is insane.
Oh yeah, man. Let me see. Let's see if we can find the actual pages for those.
But even your site, your personal site, has some wacky ass things going on with it, like boxes having these like teeth-like edges that clasp together.
Oh yeah, that is kind of interesting, huh? Let me see.
Yeah.
See, all those are just the images. Yeah, all those are just pure CSS. Okay, here's her. I don't bother with preprocessors anymore. Yeah, there it is. It's all shadows and stuff.
That was like 5,000 lines of code. That was insane.
Yeah, man.
Is what it said at the top.
What's the HTML look like on that? Probably just a bunch of boxes, right?
Yeah, let's see.
Lots of divs.
There's all the cheek texture right. Yeah, all of that is just elements.
That's insane.
Yeah, man. There's the eye. If you look inside that. Each lid is an element. Eyelashes are an element. Each of the individual lashes. And if you look at like the CSS for those, they're just rotated and stuff. The like actual look of it is a border. Pretty cool, right?
It's not cool. That's insane.
Yeah,
It's
man.
Yeah,
insanity.
That's pretty bonkers.
So on my site, so like that's probably the coolest thing that I do. Show it again. Yeah, all of those are just like that's like the most baby animation. There's not even all that much going on. That is not 5,000 lines of CSS. That is. That one is that one. I think it was this one. Nope. What is it? This one. Nope. Oh, here we go. Yeah, that's the burst animation. Is like, it just goes, zoo, moves up. Or there's the speech bubble. So like these things here.
Like 12 years ago, when I was in college, I remember they would have been having me do this in Flash.
Yep.
And this would not even have been a pipe dream for CSS. It was just about how your page looked.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah,
that
man.
They can do that now.
And so like that, the little speech bubble carrot. Check this out.
It's also its own element.
Yep.
Wacky.
So it's that right there, and it's just a trapezoid that I'm like masking half of and rotating. So like that's me rotating it the normal way.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then all this like overlapping and stuff. The stuff is actually not that hard. But it does look kind of like it is. Or like another thing is like those scan lines. Check this out. So I did that scan lines thing on there. Everything in design has a purpose. And the purpose of that one, where's the animation on that? Background wrapper, there it is. No. Man, I even have like a silly name for it. It's called like Buzzy Background or something. That. Nope. Oh, that's gonna drive me nuts. Maybe it's this one. that's the poster. There's the video. Oh man, where'd it go? Hold on. I gotta find this. You're gonna think it's cool.
It was there on page you had a second ago, fuzzy background.
I don't see it.
No, back when you went back into the terminal, it was like a couple screens back.
It's this one here, the bad scan lines one, which header background cover. Header background cover? No. Bad scan lines. Bad scan lines. Nope. Header. Header background.
It's not background cover, is it? Just background cover? Which is right there in the middle.
Oh yeah, there it is. Good call. Scan lines. So if I turn those off, okay, so now they stopped moving. That animation is what makes them jump around and stuff. Okay, so now they're not moving. And if I get rid of that background entirely, okay, we got that. Okay, so now we see the actual video, and it kind of looks like shit because it's a video, and I want it to load up when you go to the page. And so I use these to cover up how bad the quality of the video is. Now you can't tell that the video isn't actually very good quality because it's tiny. This whole thing is... All right, that MP4, there you go. It's 1.5 megs for a pretty long video. Anyway, other questions about CSS, Flex, Grid, any of that kind of stuff? It's all just boxes, man. Boxes inside of boxes inside of boxes. Flex and Grid give us a lot more control over how things are laid out in those boxes, how they grow, how they shrink, the order they happen in. We can do things like make these grids and stretch things over them and place them in different places. But fundamentally, boxes on boxes on boxes. All right. I hope that helped increase your confidence on CSS a little bit.
It was really cool.
Thank
It was
you
really
so
cool.
much.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. See you guys at Feelings in a little bit.